Hello, and welcome to the Tango Musicality Lab, a space where we explore how tango music shapes the way we move, connect, and express ourselves on the dance floor. Remember, the better you understand the music, the better you dance. What is musicality? The term musicality is such a broad and abstract concept that it is difficult to understand. In fact, when we look up the definition of this word, we find that the concept is poorly developed. In principle, musicality is the ability to understand the language of music, and it is this ability that allows us to move through that language, to adopt it, and to give it a personal aspect. Musicality is a quality of music. The root of the term clearly shows its origin in music, and its etymological meaning is characteristic of being musical. Again, we find a too broad and/or abstract definition, which I guess only musicians and dancers partially understand its meaning. For this reason, I've decided to share with you some of the publications I came across during my research. I believe each of them offers valuable insights for a deeper understanding of the concept, exploring musicality from different perspectives and across different art forms. So, let's begin with a simple premise. Musicality is a quality that can be found not only in music itself, but also in speech, poetry, dance, and many other arts. Musicality in speech. In this first section, we will look at a selection of quotations from philosophers, musicologists, and educationalists who suggest that a form of musicality already existed in speech. In other words, that there has always been a connection between speech and music. Rousseau, quoting Strabo, "Saying and singing used to be the same thing, which proves," he adds, "that poetry is the source of eloquence. Both were born from the same origin, and at first they were one and the same." Fubini, 1970, quotes Rousseau, who reaffirms this theory by observing the following. Rousseau prefers singing to instrumental music because he considers that music finds in it its original nature. In the past, when man was in a state of nature, music and speech constituted an indivisible nexus, and man could express his passions and feelings in the most complete way. Another fascinating theory was proposed by Stephen Mithun, an archaeologist and cultural anthropologist, author of The Singing Neanderthals and The Prehistory of the Mind, The Cognitive Origins of Art, Religion, and Science. Mithun argues that before the existence of words, emotional communication took place through music, or rather through sound. He points to music as the predecessor of language, suggesting that its primary purpose has always been to express and communicate emotion. He also points out that our understanding of how musical and linguistic abilities evolved is still quite limited, mainly because archaeologists have focused more on the intellectual side of early humans than on the emotional dimension of that evolution. Within this same line of thought, John Blacking, ethnomusicologist and social anthropologist, proposes that there exists a pre-linguistic, musical, and nonverbal mode of thought and action. Musicality and poetry. Here's a quote from Reysan in The Musicality of Words. "It is certainly an old dream to turn words into music. But in truth, words are already music. That is what good literature is all about. Think, for example, of poetry, which seeks to achieve through the spell of words elevated levels of beauty, harmony, and musicality." As in the previous chapter, in which several theories about the connection between music and speech were presented, in this section, we will analyze the same musical aspect in poetry. According to the ancient Greeks, there were three main types of poetry. First, lyric poetry, originally sung to the sound of the lyre or hand harp, a meaning that later expanded to describe poetry even without music. Then, dramatic or theatrical poetry, and finally, epic or narrative poetry. Of course, if we look more deeply into the world of poetry, we'll find that there are many other forms as well. For example, the avant-garde movements of the 20th century gave rise to phonetic poetry and sound poetry, styles where musicality and pure sound are explored without limits. Now, as we move into our main theme, we discover that in poetry, musicality lives within the rhythm of every verse. In other words, It's created through rhyme and through the overall rhythmic flow that shapes the poem from within. Let's take a closer look. The rhythm of a poem is built through its accents, its pauses, whether strophic, versal, or caesural, and through enjambment, a poetic device where a phrase continues on to the next line instead of ending where the verse does. Rhythm can also be created through the intentional use of phonemes, the basic units used to study the sound structure of a language. This is beautifully illustrated in Rubén Darío's poem. Amoroso pájaro que trinos exhala, bajo el ala a veces ocultando el pico, que desdenes rudos lanza bajo el ala aleve del leve abanico. Now that we have a general overview of poetry and musicality, we will make a brief parenthesis to introduce the concept of recitado, recitation, and then go on to listen to some examples. Recitation. Reciting is the act of vocalizing a speech or sentence aloud. The term recite can be used for any kind of reading, literary or scientific texts, but it is usually used mainly for the declamation of a poetic work. The reciter adds a series of ornaments to his or her attitude and voice to enhance the beauty of the verses, or to reinforce the meaning of the text.
Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Escribir, por ejemplo, la noche está estrellada y tiritan azules los astros a lo lejos. El viento de la noche gira en el cielo y canta. Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Yo la quise y a veces ella también me quiso. En las noches como esta la tuve entre mis brazos. La besé tantas veces bajo el cielo infinito.
Poem 20 by Pablo Neruda is about the loss of romantic love and the nostalgia of remembering the loved one. It expresses the end of a love relationship with feelings of pain, loneliness, and melancholy. Throughout the recitation, Neruda reinforces these feelings through his tone of voice, the rhythm and speed of his recitation, and the pauses. We could say that this is the musicality that the poem suggests to him at the moment of recitation. And furthermore, thanks to his interpretation of it, the reciter reinforces the meaning of the words.